Hey everyone, my name is Meera. Welcome back to my channel. By now, I'm pretty sure that at least some of you know just how much I'm fond of fantasy fiction and how that is my all-time favorite genre. So I'm always looking for new fantasy series to binge read or fantasy standalones to cry over because there's no more stories to be written in those worlds. And so I had to make this video because even within the genre of fantasy, there are so many diverse categories and elements to take into consideration. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of fantasy books that everyone who is interested in the genre should try out. First, mythological fantasy. These are books that surround the myths and the tales rooted in a community's history. They could be Greek mythology, Indian mythology, Egyptian, and many more. Now, these books tend to be either retellings or they focus on some aspect of a mythological figure's life. I would highly recommend trying out the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan, which is about a boy named Percy who comes to know one day that he is the son of Poseidon. Another series that I would recommend if you're interested in mythological fantasy is the Gods and Monsters series by Kelly Keaton. This is a retelling of Medusa's story and I absolutely loved it. The second kind of fantasy books are paranormal fantasies. Now these are books that feature supernatural creatures like vampires, werewolves, witches, fays, shapeshifters, gargoyles, poltergeists, and so many more. I have just about begun scratching the surface of the end number of books that you can find within this genre. And usually they have tons of adventure in these books to keep you up all night. Some of the books you should check out if you're interested in paranormal fantasy are the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, the Fever series by Kieran Mary Mourning, the Secret Circle series by L.J. Smith, and the Vampire Academy series by Rishan Mead. All of these books are just great and I'm sure you'll have a gala time reading them. The third category is monarchical fantasies. Now these have an element of royalty and are usually the stories about ruling families. The worlds within these books have a monarchy, whether utopian or a dystopian society, that varies from book to book. But come on, it's a fantasy. So there's at least one character in the book who is fighting the ruler. Sounds familiar? Yes, I am hinting at none other than the Game of Thrones series. That is one good series to try if you're interested in monarchical fantasies. Other examples would be Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, The Finnegan of the Rock trilogy by Melina Marchetta. The fourth kind of fantasy books are dystopian fantasies. Now these are pretty similar to monarchical fantasies, but instead of a monarch, a ruler, they usually have a corrupt government at its center. And so the living conditions of the people within that society tends to be very poor, which is the cause that kickstarts the story of the protagonist as he or she tries to save the people. Some very good dystopian fantasies that I would suggest reading are The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, Matched by Ali Condi, and Soul Print by Megan Miranda. Matched by Ali Condi is quite an interesting book because what happens within that society is that the government decides who you get matched up with. The people within that society do not have the freedom or the liberty to choose their own partners. I've heard that the second and third book aren't as great as the first one. I've only read the first one and I really like that. So check out at least the first book in that series. The fifth one is time travel fantasy. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? So what's special about these books is that they play around with different time periods. And so either the protagonist or some other character in the book travels back in time or to the future by way of some mechanism. You remember the time turner that Hermione, Ron and Harry get in Harry Potter series and how they're able to travel back in time? That's pretty much the case. Some of the books within this category I would recommend are Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, Time Will Tell by Anjali Budget. The last kind of fantasy books I want to talk about are science fiction fantasies. Now these have some element of science and technology in them, but usually based in either parallel realms or new worlds, and hence they're not borrowed from reality, which is what makes them a fantasy. In addition to robots and artificial intelligence, there are many unique aspects to science fiction fantasies. Some books that are really popular and that are well done within this genre are The Saga by Brian K. Vaughan. This is a graphic novel series. The Host by Stephanie Meyer. And finally, Illuminate by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. You must be wondering, what about the books like Mistborn, the Wheel of Time series, and Terry Pratchett's books? Now, these fall under genres like epic fantasy, dark fantasy, and urban fantasy. But why I have focused on these 6 kinds of fantasy books is because all the books within epic fantasy, dark fantasy, and urban fantasy fall under one of these categories or borrow elements from multiple of these kinds of books. Fantasy in itself is a very fluid and creative genre. It borrows elements from different kinds of writings. So I believe these are the main 6 kinds of fantasy books you're bound to encounter. If I'm missing anything, please let me know in the comments below. What are your favorite kinds of fantasy books to read? There is no limit to what you can do with this ability to create new worlds, characters, systems of governance, etc. I love fantasy genre. I don't think I've said it enough. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.